The Trikirion of Literacy. It all started a long time ago, 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens started developing the articulated language that they are still using. If you take this into account, 3 articulations appeared in that articulated language. The first one, vowel and consonants, building up clusters of vowel and consonants that became roots attached to some ideas or items. The fact that Homo sapiens could tremendously articulate many sounds because of various mutations that were developed by the species when it started running, bipedal running, long distance running, and fast running to be able to hunt in a savanna. The second articulation that came after is categorical. Those roots which were neither spatial nor temporal, neither nominal nor verbal, were specified as spatial or temporal, nominal or verbal. And the third articulation is a syntactic articulation that gives functions to all those elements. Functions in the spatial field, like agent, like theme, like location, goal, and source, or functions within the temporal field, tenses, moods, and a few others of that type called conjugation. When you have that in mind, those clusters, very simple at the beginning and built up into complex units, became a great lexicon that was the basis of the development of something that is essential for Homo sapiens: communication. Oral communication is based on those clusters that have nothing to do with what they design and what they designate. They are symbolical. They are symbolic of those items they are attached to. This symbolic function of the human mind, symbolacy, is fundamental for the development of the mind and of the species, because it's the basis of communication. When we speak of communication, we have to keep in mind that it is, first of all, conceptualizing elements behind and in symbolic clusters of vowels and sound and consonants. When you have that in mind, we can start moving up the phylogenic line of Homo sapiens. Unluckily, we cannot speak of what we don't touch, and I can speak of the phylogeny of language in abstract terms, but not in archaeological terms, because we can only deal with what the older species, what Homo sapiens in the old time left behind. If we take Homo sapiens, we start finding things they left behind, of course, tools and weapons. Those can go back to more than 300,000 years, because Neanderthals, Denisovans, and many other hominin species had weapons and tools made of stone, but made, that is to say, produced by some kind of work for a certain function. But apart from that, we have little on the table. And it only starts around 45,000, 50,000 BCE, where we find in caves in Europe, in Asia, and apparently in other parts of the world, Africa for instance, we find pictures painted or sculpted into the rock face of caves, but also we find cryptic symbols that we cannot understand, but all that we do find them, but not before 45,000, 50,000 BCE for Homo sapiens. Whereas Neanderthal, we have a few cases in Spain at 100,000 BCE, and the other species recently discovered Naledi, Homo naledi, in South Africa. It is, the engravings over the tombs of some of their members in caves are dated 300,000 BCE. The fact that those two species use some kind of carved symbols over the tombs of buried members of the tribe, of the community, is bringing up the idea that, after all, we only have there for Homo sapiens around 45,000, 50,000 BCE. Is Naledi, is Neanderthal, and probably Denisovans in Asia, but we don't have much about them, had exactly the same problem, but a long time before Homo sapiens. That, I don't say that Naledi was a sapiens. I don't know. But one thing is sure, is that 300,000 years BCE, as compared to 45, 50,000 years BCE, is at least 6 times older than Homo sapiens engraving on the rock face of the cave they lived in. If you take now, we're going to get a little bit down the earth, the symboloracy of, I'm going to stay in Europe, because it has been studied more and we have more available data. If we take that symbol of what is called the Venus of Predmosti, which is in the Czech Republic, and which is dated as coming from the Pavlovian culture that developed there between 29 and 27,000 years BCE, that is, at least 10,000 years before the peak of the Ice Age. You look at a picture and you find out that it is not really representational. It has been symbolically distorted from reality. But you can see that this woman, because it is a woman, has two enormous breasts, a rather small stomach, womb, but with a belly button, essential. And then under a vulva, which is big and actually not in the proper direction. But it doesn't change anything as for what it is. It's obvious that this woman is symbolically represented as being a mother from top to bottom, a procreator that is fertilized by a man actually, and there are representations of many, and I say this time representation and very close to reality of many penises, but not in this picture. The vulva makes her a procreator. She is giving life. She is carrying that life for 9 months in her womb. She will deliver that child who will have a scar showing his or her birth, the belly button, and she will feed that child for 18 months before she delivers the next child. This is symbolic. Symboleracy in that picture is enormous. It enables us to say that this Homo sapiens, who engraved this picture in an animal horn, so it lasted long, it was a durable medium, and the durable medium has reached us. These Homo sapiens had a tremendous semantic power and symbolic power. They were able to express a lot of things by symbols. Symbols that could be representational, like in this case, but symbols that could be non-representational at all. We'll see in a minute. This is before, a long time before, the peak of the Ice Age, and hence before the development of Homo sapiens towards agriculture, herding, and a few other activities of that sort. We can jump fast on this language and symboloracy of language as such, as an oral medium, and we jump to a great important evolution, the invention of writing, which is the shift from a purely oral language that can only be heard and spoken in presentia with the interlocutor in front of you. No kind of delay between uttering the message and receiving the message. Writing makes language possible in absentia. That is to say, the speaker is there, the interlocutor is not. The first symbolic writing system, supposedly to be the oldest in the world, but we have no proof of that, it is the oldest we know, which is better than saying the oldest in the world, is the Sumerian symboloracy of cuneiforms. I insist, they are Sumerian. They are not Akkadian. The Akkadians were the scribes of the Sumerian merchants and political authorities and personalities, but they were not the Akkadians. They were not those who invented those cuneiforms, for a simple reason. Akkadian is a Semitic language and has only one vowel, which is Aleph, or Aleph if you prefer, one or the other doesn't matter, which is always an initial vowel that is put in at the beginning of a root and a word that is derived from that root. You have it very easily, you can understand. Adam is one, and Adam is a reduction of Adama, which is the earth, and Adam is made from the earth. We know that. Linguistically, it is exactly what they say in the Bible, but it's purely linguistic and hence symbolic. So apart from that, Sumerian has 5 vowels, and those 5 vowels can be autonomous, independent words with meaning and characteristics, with all the things that are necessary for a word to be a word. The 3 articulations, among other things. I've given you one example there, which is a simple one, father and mother. You can find out that father and mother, the symbols that are there, have nothing to do with the father and the mother, have nothing to do even with the sounds, because the first one is ad for the father, and the second one is amma for the mother. I repeat, we are in Sumerian. The a at the beginning of those 2 words is not the aleph or aleph of the Semitic languages. It is one vowel among others, among 5 of them. And you can see that there is maybe some kind of a connection, a pattern from one to the other, but maybe. We don't know actually. So far, the people who are working on Sumerian have not been able to find out a logic, linguistic logic, in the writings of the symbols. Then I gave you a Maya case, which is glyphic syllabary. At this time we are clear, it is a syllabary at this level of development, and I gave you the name of the main god of the Mayas, which is Janalye, that is the maize god, the god of corn or of maize if you prefer. Those 3 elements are composed. They are composed visually in a glyph, and they are composed orally in the production, the oral realization of the glyph. You can find that on the left you have a symbol Jun or Hun that represents 1, meaning what we're going to talk of, the glyph is going to designate a first being. On top you have a second glyph that is the representation of, or the designation of, maize, the corn itself. So first character attached to maize, and under the main glyph, actually as for size, is a symbol that means is a third person pronoun in most cases, but in this particular case it due to the context, it takes another value which is listed, and that value is revealed. That is to say, it is divine in nature. And if it is divine in nature, then you have first, top, divine entity attached to maize, that is, the maize god. That's logical. I mean, we can linguistically understand the composition of the glyph and the composition of the elements, and we can understand the value, final total value of it. When you have looked at that, the symboloracy of language, written language in that case, we enter at 3,500 years BCE in Europe or in the Middle East with Sumerian, maybe earlier in other civilizations, but definitely that in the Western world of civilization, maybe we are badly informed and we don't have things that are older than that. But that's how it is. We don't think there is any writing actually in the caves that are decorated at 45,000. But we come to it straight away, Paleolithic time, but it's no longer the symboloracy of language. It is symboloracy of numbers I want to insist on. You have a few pictures there that I gave you, and what is important here is the discussion we have on the dots and the lines you can find in some of those drawings that go back, I repeat, to 50,000 years BCE. You can see that the numbers of the dots is very clearly identifiable for us, and at the same time that the dots may have different shapes, smaller, bigger. The line might be straight or might not be straight, vertical or horizontal. All those elements are symbolic and meaningful, but we don't know what they mean. They didn't give us the key, or didn't leave behind a user's book for those things. What is sure, and that is clearly done in the Musée d'Aquitaine in Bordeaux, which is a very important archaeological unit in Western Europe, because it is at the very center of Paleolithic caves in Dordogne, in Périgord, that is just north of Bordeaux, but it is also very close to what you have in Spain and what you have in the rest of France, so they have more or less brought together quite a lot of things, and they have found out that those dots are not haphazard. They appear in precise number with some representational images like horses or rocks, bison, and apparently even lions and fish. Those numbers we don't know at all. They are attached to those dots, to those pictures, but we don't know at all what they really mean, what would be, what they would represent. Do they represent the name of the animal, or do they represent an address to the animal in order to tame the animal for hunting and so on? but the numbers are not haphazard. Though the presentation that I got from Bordeaux makes many possible numbers of dots for the same representation. Note that each representation has a particular number. Some numbers will not appear with some of those representations, and some will only appear with some of the representations. You have the listing that is given by the museum in Bordeaux. But this numeracy, because it is numeracy, is a lot more complex when you take into account the work of a certain man, Alexander Marshak, who found some very complex, let's say, representation lines, assembly of those kinds of marks. Though the marks there can be very different in structure, in nature, and in the tool that actually produced them. I gave you one which is the center of a lot of discussion, which comes from the Abri Blanchard. It's called the calendar, I'm not quite sure. Abri Blanchard, which is an important cave in a set of caves in France. This numeracy and Paleolithic calendar is supposed to be the calendar based on the cycles of the moon. And Marshak considers that, first, those people did not know how to count. That I doubt very much. And second, that it represented, and that's the only hypothesis he put on the table, the moon cycle. We have to wonder, was the moon cycle the most important cycle for those Paleolithic people? Or was there another cycle that we could see in those marks that was a lot more important for the Paleolithic people? The discussion is, and I developed it in a book, the discussion is about, is it a representation of moon cycle or moon cycles in the plural, because there are a lot more than 28 days, or is it a representation of the menstrual cycle which is fundamental to produce children in a civilization that is under harsh pressure from nature as for their survival. They have to make children to survive and to expand. And that is essential. You have to identify the fertile period in the menstrual cycle of the woman, so that impregnation, ritualized of course, will be possible and effective. Then you have to also observe and count the pregnancy cycle, which is based in many ways on the previous one, and it is 9 months or so, and there are various phases in that cycle. And it is important for them to know, to observe, and to understand what's happening in that pregnancy cycle, because there are great dangers all along of natural abortion, of accidental abortion, of dying of the fetus, and that will give stillborn births, which is no longer a birth anyway, and other elements of that type. And the growth of the fetus is, or can be followed by observation. Some of those important set of marks can go a long way beyond 28 days. That's the case, by the way, on this one. And it can go a longer way than 9 months. At least some of them are 3, 4, 5 months, and are probably the recording of a pregnancy that ended up shortened by miscarriage. That's now, to remain within numeracy, it is quite obvious that those marks, if they have a meaning, and it's a basic idea we bring forward, they must have a meaning. These marks are in certain numbers, and the numbers are essential. And if they count days, or if they represent days, it's obvious that those days are units. By the way, day and one is very often the same root. Tick in Indo-European, for example, which will give the finger as much as the day and number one. But what is important, when you have 4 dots of a certain type, those 4 dots of a certain type are 4 dots of a certain type, and they represent something that has some meaning, and we have to find out the meaning, because once again we don't have a user's booklet. When you understand that numeracy, very old numeracy, representational numeracy, you understand the big revolution that will appeared in the 16th, 17th century, maybe earlier, definitely earlier in some other countries. I gave you a few pictures. The Pascaline from Blaise Pascal in Europe is the first calculator, mechanical calculator. It is, of course, invented by Blaise Pascal, so it is 17th century. But the others, the Russian abacus and the Chinese abacus, are definitely older, a lot older than the Pascaline, because they were in use in Russia in the Middle Ages. And I'm pretty sure that there were some kind of abacus in Western Europe, some kind of counting, recording technique to calculate prices, sales, and so on and so on. We know that numbers were essential for the building of the Romanesque church and the Gothic church. They are all based on geometrical figures with dimensions that are clearly connected one to the other. And you find out that 2 numbers are essential in Romanesque and Gothic building or churches. It is pi and phi. Pi for the circle and phi for the golden ratio, as they called it, from other proportions. Rectangles were always based on phi, that is to say, the longer side was phi times the shorter side. And they always did like that. In fact, they had procedures that were with strings and tools like that, enabled them to have that proper proportion, because they had calculated and found out, coming from Greece at times, a long time ago, those elements. So numeracy also had its techneracy, and the techneracy, like writing for literacy, for linguistic symboloracy, here the techneracy are those machines, calculating machines, primitive, the first three, and the present calculator you have on any desk or any computer, that is purely digital and computerized. That's techneracy in the field of numeracy. But techneracy is a tremendous and vast domain. It's very easy to say, very fast, that there would not have been the modern world today if from the 17th century onwards, maybe a little bit earlier, if you take into account the water mirrors of the 9th, 10th century of the Benedictine Revolution in Europe, after Charlemagne and his religious revolution, had not existed then. That's techneracy. Techneracy is, of course, the calculators, the abacus or other methods to calculate and record numbers and figures, and of course techneracy will come from the 18th century with the mechanized weaving loom and with the mechanized braiding loom, which is essential and in the Middle Ages, before what we may know, but going back to the 12th century or so, and both weaving and braiding looms, but they are not mechanized then, and they turned mechanized or mechanical in the 18th century for the weaving loom, and they seem to be maybe a little bit earlier for the braiding loom. But anyway, mechanization appears in those fields in the 18th century. And then, from there, the problem was, what energy can we use to mechanize those machines? Water at first, the water mills, yes, for sure. But there a steam engine appeared at the same, a little bit later, and the steam engine was a tremendous technical revolution, techneracy, which is a machine that is symbolic in the fact that it does what a human being can do with his own hands and so on and so on. It replaces human work with mechanical work. That's what the water mills did in the 9th and 10th century in Europe. The Benedictines that were obliged to respect the religious revolution of Charlemagne, 52 Sundays that were not worked at all, and 3 one-week festivals at least in the year. That is 75 to 80 days without work. 20% of the working time was sterilized as working times by Charlemagne's religious revolution. And that lack of work was replaced from the 10th century, 11th century by the watermill that the Benedictines introduced in Europe. They recaptured it, they found it in the old Roman libraries. The Romans had invented it, but never used it because slaves were good enough to do that kind of work. And then that's what technocracy is. That is to say, a machine that replaces human work. And if you take into account all those things, you find out that the consequences are enormous. And the first consequence is the disappearance of many human jobs, creating social conflicts, creating evolution, but at the same time, the apparition development of many new jobs. That's why I gave you les belles sténodactylographes, the beautiful secretaries, shorthand typists, as they're called in English, of Apollinaire in 1913, before the First World War. Yes, because such a profession didn't exist before the invention of the keyboard that came along with the invention of the typing machine. And that invention of the typing machine got rid of a tremendous number of copyists who were just writing down and copying documents to distribute them before the printing machine. Then they were printed, but once again the original was written by hand, and there suddenly you shifted from giving the pattern of a letter to the secretary orally, and she typed the letter because she had learned how to type, and she had learned how to type a letter. That was her profession. And that new job replaced a tremendous number of other jobs that were made obsolete. And that is the pattern in our world. Many new jobs are going to appear and are already appearing, with including with artificial intelligence, while many other jobs are disappearing, replaced by the machine. That comes to the simple conclusion that there is no future without education. And we're not talking of small, little education. We're talking of hefty education at a very high level, where you have to learn all the symboloracy of the beginning of the language, all the literacy of the language, all the numeracy of numbers and operations, and all the technocracy of the modern world. Some people pretend that we can all learn everything, which is absurd. We, the children particularly, but not only the young people and the older people, only learn, one, what they need, and two, what they like or are interested in. You can do what you want. Everyone is not able to become a doctor, or a nurse, or a digital engineer. Some people will become all those complex professions, but not all of them, all the professions. They will choose one, they might be obliged to choose a second one later on to adapt to evolution, but they will not all learn everything the same way. Every single learner has to be a self-learner, and if he is a self-learner, he is going to learn what he likes, what he desires to learn, what he wants to learn, what he is interested in. And you can beat about the bush as much as you like, that's not going to produce a burning bush. If we get there, I give you a type of discourse from an organization that pretend that we are all capable. Yes, we are all capable to learn, but we are not all capable to learn everything. We are all capable to learn something that interests us and nothing else. That's a limitation to the mobility, the flexibility that human beings are going to be confronted to with artificial intelligence. We will have to be flexible. We will have to change fields. We will start with something and end up with something else. There's no way out of this logic. But that doesn't make us able to learn everything. We will remain within what interests us. We might develop new interests, but it will still be the same rule. We will learn, self-learn, guided self-learn only what interests us at the moment of learning. So, when I come to my conclusion now, it is the fact that obviously the trip is maybe finished for us, but the trip is not finished for humanity. In fact, if for us our trip is finished, the adventure is just starting. And the adventure is what is going to happen tomorrow when AI, Gen AI, will be dominant everywhere. We can believe with Mr. What's his name? We can believe with Mr. I don't know the book here. Borne, I think, doesn't matter really now. We can believe with him that we will adapt. Yeah, we will adapt. But we'll be flexible, but not necessarily willing to adapt and be flexible. We might be forced, whipped into being flexible. And that will create conflicts and many other things. Yet, we must understand tomorrow's society will not be built on one personality model. It will be built on many different personality models, each one having its own dynamic power and evolution. That's why I gave you the picture of a suspended bridge in Bordeaux again, which is an enormous suspended bridge where you have the bikeways clearly separated from the bridge, from the main lanes, and the lanes for the cars that are also separated from the bike lane. And the bike lane must be only one and go in two directions. As you can see, the two bicyclists on the picture are just going the wrong way because they're going towards us, whereas the cars on the other side, on the right of the bridge, and we are in France, so we are driving on the right, are going the other way, the other direction. So that's what society is going to be tomorrow. And that's the complete mistake of the extremes in our society that consider that we have to decide and impose in a way or another by street riots, by strikes, or by votes, one vision for everyone. When Moreau decided that a retiring age was lowered to 60, he decided that it was lowered to 60, so it was lowered 5 years for everyone, and that what it became compulsory. And that was the mistake. The mistake is that it must not be for everyone, except if it is flexible, and it must not be compulsory because it has to be flexible. When we say in a word that in France, research workers in universities, or at least in universities, are obliged to retire at the age of 65 by the authorities of the various universities who decided to go against the desire of the government to open up retiring age for research workers, they imposed the 65 limit, which is a total absurdity. If at 65 someone who has been a research worker all his life is finished, he must have a real health problem, because there is no reason for him to be completely worn out at 65 just because he studied the French Revolution or the literature of Shakespeare. That's about all, and that's where we can stop, I guess.